Welcome back to The Explainer. Today we're getting into something absolutely crucial. You can kind of think of this session as a tactical masterclass on how our neurology gets systematically hacked by very specific argument structures. Now, in previous weeks, we looked at things like false dilemmas and circular reasoning. But today we're focusing on arguments that are specifically designed to manufacture urgency, inevitability, and emotional escalation. These are the exact kinds of arguments that make people feel like if they don't immediately agree with the conclusion, total disaster is basically guaranteed.
Okay, let's dive right into this and map out our chalkboard syllabus for the session. We're going to cover the psychology of escalation, the anatomy of a slippery slope, black or white thinking, and catastrophizing logic. And then we'll wrap it all up with a counter framework and a quick test. Just keep in mind, these aren't just bad arguments we're looking at. They're literally manufactured pressure systems.
Section 1. The Psychology of Escalation, Hacking the Survival Mechanism.
So to truly understand these argument structures, we have to look at why they actually work so well on us in the first place. See, the human brain is hardwired to prioritize an immediate reaction to a perceived threat over slow, calm analysis. We desperately crave certainty over ambiguity, and our brains will always prioritize a threat over calm. So when someone throws an escalation argument at you, it feels incredibly persuasive because it's actively simulating danger. A calm, logical argument is literally competing against your own neurological alarm system.
So what's the actual blueprint here? How does this escalation work? Well, the primary goal of these arguments is almost never accuracy. It's compression. They compress possibilities, basically stripping away any other options. They compress nuance by completely ignoring the details. And most importantly, they compress your time for reflection, demanding that you respond right now. It just makes fear so much easier to manufacture.
Moving on to Section 2. Anatomy of a slippery slope. The illusion of inevitability.
All right, so here is our first major communication virus, the slippery slope fallacy. This is an argument claiming that one single action is going to inevitably trigger a chain reaction of increasingly extreme consequences. You know, A leads to B, which leads to C and D, and ultimately, total catastrophe. And it does this without providing anywhere near enough evidence for that progression. The absolutely crucial point to remember here is that the flaw isn't that they're predicting consequences. The flaw is pretending that the chain reaction is completely 100% automatic.
Let's look at a classic example to visually demonstrate just how absurd this jump can get. Step 1. We allow students to retake one exam. Step 2. Well, pretty soon, literally nobody will study anymore. Step 3. The entire education system, as we know it, will completely collapse. Notice that massive, unsupported leap? A simple, everyday policy of letting someone retake a test suddenly morphs into total academic chaos without ever proving how we got from point A to point C. It's a completely manufactured slide into disaster.
Now, I do want to be clear here. It is really important to distinguish that not every single slippery slope argument is inherently false. I mean, some systems genuinely do escalate, right? Like unchecked inflation, where your purchasing power mathematically declines over time. But to make a valid escalation argument, the person arguing carries a very specific burden of proof. They have to actually establish the mechanism of escalation, they have to prove the probability that it's going to occur, and they have to prove there are no stopping points along the way. If they just say, well, if prices rise slightly, civilization ends. Yeah, that's the fallacy.
Let's jump to Section 3. Black or white thinking, erasing the gradients.
Black or white thinking is exactly what it sounds like. It's reducing incredibly complex situations into only two extreme options, completely ignoring any nuance, spectrums, compromises, or mixed outcomes. It aggressively demands it's either X or Y, and absolutely no middle ground is allowed. And the thing is, this fallacy is intensely attractive psychologically, because, let's face it, certainty just feels a lot cleaner and safer than ambiguity. But the massive danger here is that reality operates on a gradient-based continuum. It's almost never a simple binary.
And this brilliantly illustrates what I mean. Take a look at this classic false binary. If you criticize your country, you must hate it. But wait, that completely ignores a vast reality of other perfectly reasonable options. It completely erases things like wanting reform, having partial agreement, feeling mixed loyalty, or just offering some contextual criticism. The whole love it or hate it binary completely deletes valid middle ground realities.
To really ground this concept in everyday reality, let's use a clinical analogy. In the medical field, function exists on a continuum. A patient isn't just magically either fully independent or completely disabled. There are countless gradients of mobility and care right in the middle. So whenever an argument tries to force you into a completely disabled versus fully independent mindset about literally any topic, They are deliberately erasing the gradients to back you into a corner.
All right, Section 4, Catastrophizing Logic, Emotional Forecasting.
Our third and final logical threat on the syllabus is catastrophizing logic. This is when you interpret mere uncertainty or a bit of difficulty as absolute, concrete evidence of an impending disaster. This one is really more of an internal psychological escalation. It's basically emotional forecasting, where a tiny possibility is instantly and magically treated as a strict probability.
Let's diagram the internal mechanism of how we actually do this to ourselves. Step 1, you identify a problem, like say, making one minor mistake during a big presentation. Step 2, you immediately project the worst possible interpretation through emotional reasoning and future projection. And then, step 3, you start treating it as likely reality, basically deciding your entire career is officially over. We have all been there, right? Panicking over a tiny typo in an email and deciding we're getting fired by noon. Unlike the slippery slope, this is often something we do internally rather than an argument we push on others. But man, is it highly contagious socially. You see this constantly in the news. One minor economic dip gets framed as the total collapse of modern society.
Okay, Section 5, Counter Framework and Test, Neutralizing the Threat. It is officially time to arm yourselves with the ESL 2.0 Counter Framework.
Go ahead and take a mental screenshot of this blackboard right here, because these are your exact deployment frameworks to instantly dismantle artificial urgency whenever it pops up in a conversation. If someone tries to hit you with a slippery slope, just ask them, can you show evidence that those later outcomes actually follow from the first step? If it's a black or white argument, say, hey, there may be more than two possible positions here. What exists between the extremes? And if they're catastrophizing, ground them by asking, okay, the worst-case scenario is definitely possible, but what actually makes it likely?
Now, what's really interesting about this slide is we're going to put your new skills to the test right now. I'm going to show you an argument, and I want you to mentally identify the fault.
Here's the first one. If kids use calculators, eventually nobody will know math. What is the flaw here? Take a quick second. The answer is slippery slope. That huge jump from just using a calculator to absolute total mathematical illiteracy completely lacks an evidence-backed mechanism. It's just an unsupported escalation chain with zero stopping points.
Okay, let's try another one. Either you support this policy completely or you are against progress. What's the flaw there? Notice that classic all or nothing phrasing.
And the answer is black or white thinking. It completely ignores any gradients. It forces a totally false dilemma where you either agree 100% or you're suddenly the enemy, completely removing any room for partial support or constructive critique. And that brings us to the core meta lesson for this week. You have to stay vigilant, because the goal of escalation is almost never accuracy. As we've seen today, when arguments eliminate gradients, inevitability appears. And once inevitability appears, fear becomes easier to manufacture. Don't ever let your urgency be artificially manufactured by a badly structured argument. But escalation is only half the game, because next week, we talk about something even more dangerous. What happens when people stop manipulating conclusions and start manipulating language itself? Equivocation, definition shifting, loaded terminology, the moment words stop describing reality and start controlling it. Because the fastest way to win an argument is to quietly change what the words mean halfway through the conversation.